What if everything you know about human history is just the last page of a huge book? The pharaohs, the pyramids, Rome, the Renaissance, all of it is only 5% of our story. The other 95% has been forgotten. 300,000 years of art, survival, migration, and belief wiped from memory. Tonight, we explore the missing thousands of years, the world before writing, the people before cities, the life before civilization. This is the history you were never taught. Chapter 1, The Forgotten 95%. But before we begin, do not forget to subscribe. And if you truly enjoy these videos, please leave a like. Let us begin. What if everything you think you know about human history is just the last page of a huge book? What if the story you learned in school, the pharaohs and pyramids, the rise of Rome, the great cathedrals of Europe, is only a tiny piece of who we really are? Here is the truth. Civilization, as we understand it, the cities, the writing, the farming, the governments, all of it began about 12,000 years ago. But anatomically modern humans, people who looked just like you and me, who thought like you and me, who loved and feared and dreamed like you and me, have existed for at least 300,000 years. Do the math. That means 95% of human existence happened before anyone planted a crop, before anyone built a city, before anyone carved their name into stone. 300,000 years. Try to hold that number in your mind. If all of human history were squeezed into a single 24-hour day, civilization would begin at 11 minutes to midnight. Everything that came before, the hunters stalking mammoths across frozen steppes, the artists painting by torchlight in caves, the migrants crossing land bridges into unknown continents. All of that fills the other 23 hours and 49 minutes. We have almost completely forgotten those hours. This is the story of the missing millennia. The 100,000 years before civilization changed the world. This is the story of who we were before we became who we are. The land stretches before us, with no roads or fences. There are no borders except those made by rivers and mountains and the movement of herds. The world is bigger than it will ever be again, and emptier and more dangerous, but it is not silent. Listen carefully. The wind carries voices. Somewhere in Africa, maybe in the highlands of Ethiopia or the grasslands of Morocco, a group of humans is moving. There are maybe 30 people, maybe 40. Men, women, children, elders. They walk with purpose, following trails their grandparents taught them. Trails their grandparents learned from ancestors whose names were never written down. Because writing does not exist yet, and will not exist for another 290,000 years. They are not primitive. That word means nothing here. Their brains are the same as ours in every way we can measure. Their ability for language, for planning, for abstract thinking, for love and grief and wonder matches anything we have today. They just live in a world with different rules. They carry with them everything they need. Stone tools made with great skill, each flake struck at exactly the right angle. Animal skins worked soft with bone scrapers and stretched over wooden frames. Containers woven from plant fibers. Knowledge stored not in books but in songs and stories, in the careful teaching from elder to child, in the memory of places and seasons and the behaviors of animals. This is the original human life. This is how we lived for most of our existence as a species, and we were amazingly successful at it. Look at the evidence. When humans first appeared in Africa, we were one species among many. The world had Neanderthals in Europe and Western Asia, Denisovans in the mountains of Central Asia, Homo erectus still living in Southeast Asia, and maybe other groups we have not found yet. Our ancestors shared the planet with multiple other human species. By 30,000 years ago, we were the only ones left. What happened? How did anatomically modern humans come to take over the entire globe while every other human species disappeared? The answer is in those forgotten millennia. Somewhere in the long stretch of time between our beginning and the dawn of civilization, something changed, not our bodies. Our bodies were basically modern by 300,000 years ago. What changed was smaller and more powerful. We became behaviorally modern. We developed the full set of abilities that makes us uniquely human. We made art. We developed complex language. We invented symbolic thinking, the ability to let one thing stand for another. We built social networks that reached across huge distances. We adapted to places our ancestors could never have survived. And we did all of this without writing, without cities, without farming, without any of the things we usually connect with advanced civilization. This may be the most amazing fact about our species. The thinking revolution that made us who we are happened in deep prehistory that most people never think about. When archaeologists talk about behavioral modernity, they mean a group of abilities that show up together in what they dig up. These include making art and personal ornaments, using pigments for symbolic meaning, the making of complex multi-part tools, evidence of long-distance trade networks, careful burial of the dead, and living in tough environments. The timing of this behavioral change is debated. Some researchers place it around 50,000 years ago, matching the big migration out of Africa that filled the rest of the world. Others say it grew slowly over hundreds of thousands of years, with different abilities appearing at different times and places. But whatever its exact timing, the behavioral shift changed everything. Before it, humans made decent tools and survived in their African homeland. After it, humans could adapt to any environment on Earth. From tropical rainforests to Arctic tundra, humans could plan months and years ahead. Humans could organize into groups bigger than ever before. Humans could pass knowledge across generations with better and better success. And here is the key point. All of this happened before civilization. All of this happened during the hunter-gatherer era that most history books skip in one paragraph. The people who painted the caves of France and Spain, who made bone needles and ivory figurines, who tracked herds across continents and used the stars to navigate, these were not almost human ancestors. They were us genetically, mentally, emotionally. They were fully human in every way we recognize. If you could take a baby from those times and raise it in the modern world, it would grow up just like any other child. It would learn calculus and compose music and argue philosophy. The potential was always there. The difference was not in the brain, hardware, but in the built-up knowledge each generation passes to the next. This is what we have forgotten. Not just deep past events, but the basic truth that civilization is new and not guaranteed. For most of our existence, humans lived differently. We lived in ways modern people can barely imagine, and still, the echoes remain. Why do children fear the dark? Because for hundreds of thousands of years, darkness brought predators. Why do we crave stories told around fires? Because for hundreds of thousands of years, the fire circle was the center of social life, the place where knowledge was shared and bonds were formed. Why do we dream of open spaces and running water? Because our brains evolved in a world where those things meant survival. We carry the deep past inside us. It shapes our fears and desires in ways we rarely notice. The modern world is a thin layer over minds that were built for a completely different life. This is not pretending the past was perfect. Hunter-gatherer life was hard in ways most modern people would find unbearable. Many babies did not survive. Injury often meant death. Violence was common. Starvation was always possible. No one should pretend the past was all good, but understanding the past helps us understand ourselves. It explains why we feel what we feel, why our societies struggle with the problems they struggle with, why we want things that civilization cannot provide. The missing 100,000 years is not truly missing. It lives on in our genes, in our instincts, in the deepest parts of our minds. We just need to know where to look. In the chapters that follow, we will explore this forgotten world. We will meet the first anatomically modern humans and trace their rise in Africa. We will live among the hunter-gatherers and understand their daily lives. We will stand in the caves where the first artists worked by flickering torchlight. We will survive the ice ages that nearly wiped out our species. We will follow the great migrations that carried humans to every continent. We will explore the first stirrings of spirituality and religion. We will examine the technologies that made everything possible. And we will finally arrive at the great change, the moment when humans left the life they had known for hundreds of thousands of years and chose something radically new. This is a story of adaptation and toughness, of creativity and endurance, of violence and cooperation. It is the story of how a fairly fragile African ape came to rule an entire planet. It is, in other words, our story, the part we forgot, the ancient god. The land waits. The ancestors are moving. Let us follow them back into the forgotten world and discover who we really are. Close your eyes. Let the modern world fade. The hum of electricity disappears. The faraway sound of traffic fades away. The glow of screens dims to nothing. Now imagine waking in a world with no walls, no roads, no machines. The air smells of wood smoke and earth and growing things. The sky is filled with more stars than any living person has ever seen, untouched by artificial light. The darkness is total, and the night sounds are wild. This is where the journey begins, not as tourists visiting a strange place, but as travelers returning home. Because this is where we came from. This is the world that made us. And if we listen carefully across the huge gulf of time, we can still hear it calling. Chapter 2. When we became us, the first anatomically modern humans. The skull sits in a locked case in a museum in Morocco. It is broken, incomplete, put back together by patient hands over decades. But look at the face, the cheekbones, the jaw, the proportions. You know this face. It could belong to someone you passed on the street today. This is Jebel Irhoud. And according to the most careful dating methods in modern science, the human remains found here are about 315,000 years old. For most of the 20th century, scientists believed that our species, Homo sapiens, began in East Africa about 200,000 years ago. The story was simple and neat. A small population of humans evolved in the Great Rift Valley, probably in Ethiopia or Kenya, and later spread out to fill the world. Jebel Irhoud complicated that story. Here was Morocco on the other side of Africa, producing fossils that seemed just as old or older than anything from the East. The skulls showed a mix of features, some fully modern and some a bit older looking, but the faces were basically ours. What did this mean? It meant that the rise of our species was more complex than anyone had thought. It meant that human evolution did not happen in one single Garden of Eden spot, but across the huge African continent. It meant that different populations were sharing genes and ideas across thousands of miles. It meant the story was bigger than we knew. The earliest humans probably did not come from one place. They came from a network. Picture Africa 300,000 years ago. The continent is wetter than it will become later. The Sahara is not yet the wall it will become in later ages. Green pathways run through what is now desert, linking population centers separated by thousands of miles. Humans live in scattered groups, each adjusting to local conditions, but they are not cut off. People move, people meet, people have children together. Genes flow across the continent like water finding paths. In this environment, the features we connect with anatomically modern humans did not appear all at once. Different traits evolved in different places at different times. The flatter face developed here. The rounder brain case developed there. The chin, that very human feature found in no other primate, appeared somewhere else. Over hundreds of thousands of years, gene flow connected these changes. Eventually, the full set came together. This is called mosaic evolution. It means that searching for one single moment when we became us is probably the wrong question. There was no single moment. There was a slow coming together. But let us not get lost in big ideas. Let us meet the real people. At a place called Omo Kibish in southern Ethiopia, archaeologists have found remains of humans who lived about 233,000 years ago. The bones show a mix of older and modern features, but they are clearly on our side of the line that separates Homo sapiens from other human species. These people hunted along the shores of ancient Lake Turkana. They made advanced stone tools. They lived in a world full of hippos and crocodiles and huge herds of antelope. What were their lives like? We can only guess from the clues they left behind. But some things seem clear. They lived in groups. No human has ever survived alone for long. We are social animals down to our bones, depending on others for protection, for sharing food, and for passing on knowledge so each generation can use the discoveries of those before them. The Omo Kibish people would have lived in bands of maybe 20 to 50 individuals. They would have known each other closely, their social relationships as complex and detailed as any we have today. They communicated. Did they have fully developed language like ours? This is one of the great unanswered questions. Language leaves no fossil evidence. We cannot dig up a conversation. But the complexity of their tools suggests strong communication. You cannot teach someone to make a Levallois core, a method needing dozens of exact steps in the right order, without some kind of detailed teaching. Whether that teaching was spoken words, hand signals, or both, the knowledge was clearly passed on with precision. They thought about the future. The tools found at Omo Kibish and similar sites show planning. Stone was not just grabbed and used. It was chosen for special qualities, carried sometimes over long distances, and shaped into planned forms. This requires imagining future situations. It requires holding an idea in your mind and working toward it over time. It requires, in other words, the same kind of abstract thinking we use today. They may have thought about the past. At Lascaux and Kafze caves in Israel, human remains dating to 100,000 years ago were found, carefully buried, some with grave goods that suggest belief in some kind of afterlife. If people were thinking about what happens after death, they were surely also remembering those who had died. Memory, mourning, the sense of a story stretching beyond any one life. These abilities did not appear out of nowhere all at once. They developed over huge spans of time, shaped by the pressure to survive, by the needs of group life, and by the growing weight of tradition. Think about the problem our earliest ancestors faced. Africa 300,000 years ago was home to dangerous predators. Lions, leopards, hyenas that hunted in packs, crocodiles hiding in every waterway. Humans were not very fast or very strong. We did not have claws or fangs. We had no venom. What we had was each other. Our survival depended completely on cooperation. One human alone was prey. A group of humans working together, armed with stones and wooden spears, could drive off almost any threat. This created strong pressure for social intelligence. The people who could read others, who could guess intentions, who could coordinate actions, who could keep friendships and handle conflicts. These were the people who survived and had children over hundreds of thousands of years. This pressure changed our brains. We developed the largest cerebral cortex compared to body size of any animal that has ever lived. Much of that expanded cortex is used for social thinking. We are, in a very real way, built for each other. But cooperation brings its own problems. When you need others, you become open to being used. Free riders can take the benefits of the group without paying the costs. Cheaters can quit when it helps them. How do you keep cooperation when these dangers exist? The answer, or at least part of it, seems to be reputation in small groups where everyone knows everyone else. Your reputation is your most valuable treasure. People remember who helped and who did not, who shared and who hid food, who stood firm in danger and who ran away. This knowledge shapes every future meeting. If you are known as unreliable, you will be left without help when you need it most. Language may have grown partly to do this job. Gossip, the endless talk about who did what to whom, lets reputation information spread faster and farther than just watching could do. It lets the group control itself, to reward helpers and punish cheaters without constant physical fights. Is this guessing? Yes. We cannot directly watch the social life of people who lived 300,000 years ago, but the logic is strong, and the ethnographic record of recent hunter-gatherers strongly supports this picture. In societies studied by anthropologists, reputation is everything. Social approval and disapproval are the main tools for controlling behavior, and gossip is maybe the most common kind of communication. Our ancestors were not just becoming anatomically modern, they were becoming socially modern, and the two processes were closely linked. Let us return to the physical evidence. What did these early humans really look like? The skulls from Jebel Irhoud show faces that are mostly flat with modern proportions and shapes. But the brain case is a bit longer than later humans, not quite as rounded. The brow ridges are somewhat heavier. If you saw these people walking toward you across a savanna, you would know they were human right away. But you might feel something slightly different about them, something you could not quite name. Over the next 200,000 years, even those small differences would fade. The brain case would become rounder. The brow ridges would shrink. The whole skeleton would become a bit more gracile, lighter-boned, as if the body itself was becoming more refined. By the time of the Great Migrations out of Africa, humans were basically identical to modern populations. But anatomical modernity is only part of the story. More important and more mysterious is behavioral modernity. The earliest Homo sapiens made stone tools that were advanced for their time. The prepared core method known as le Valois, named after a site in France where it was first recognized, let toolmakers plan the shape of flakes before striking them. This was a big thinking step beyond earlier methods. It required planning many steps ahead. It required holding a mental pattern in mind and working toward it. But for hundreds of thousands of years, tool technology stayed fairly the same. Generation after generation made basically the same tools in basically the same ways. Change happened, but slowly. New ideas were rare. Then something changed. Starting maybe 70,000 years ago, maybe earlier in some places, the evidence begins to show faster change. New tool types appear. Bone and antler join stone as raw materials. Decorative objects, things made not for use but for beauty, begin to appear. Evidence of pigment use, coloring skin or objects or cave walls, becomes common. Long-distance trade networks appear, with materials moving hundreds of miles from where they came from. This is the behavioral revolution, and its cause is still one of the biggest debates in archaeology. Some researchers think it shows a biological change, a final improvement of the brain that unlocked thinking abilities that had been hidden. Maybe a genetic mutation affected how the brain connected or processed language. Maybe the last rewiring needed tens of thousands of years of slow change. Others think the revolution was cultural, not biological. The genetic ability for fully modern behavior had been there for a long time. But the right cultural ideas had not built up yet. Language had to become complex enough. Social networks had to become large enough. Knowledge had to build on knowledge until a key tipping point was reached. Still others say what looks like a revolution is actually a preservation trick. Earlier modern behavior existed, but left no trace. Maybe the real boom was not behavior, but population size, with bigger populations leaving more archaeological evidence. The truth probably includes some mix of all these ideas. But whatever its causes, the behavioral revolution had huge results. It made possible moving into new environments. It allowed social groups of never-before-seen complexity. It set the stage for everything that came later. We now stand at the edge of a changed world. In Africa, populations of fully modern humans are growing. Their technology is improving. Their social structures are becoming more complex. Soon, some of them will start to move. They will leave Africa for Asia and Europe. They will meet other human species, especially the Neanderthals, who have lived in Europe for hundreds of thousands of years. They will have children with these groups, and traces of that remain in our DNA today. They will adapt to places their African ancestors never imagined, and in time they will become us. But that is a story for later chapters. For now, let us stay with these early Africans, these first fully human people, and try to picture their world. The sun is setting over the savannah. A group of humans is making camp beside a stream, the same stream their parents camped beside and their grandparents before them. A fire is lit. Children play at the edge of the firelight. Adults speak in a language we would not recognize but whose feelings we would understand right away. Laughter, complaints, storytelling, the sounds of human community. They do not know they are making history. They do not know their descendants will one day walk on the moon, split the atom, read the genetic code of life itself. They know only this moment, this place, these people they love and depend on. They are us. Across 300,000 years, the connection remains unbroken. And when we look into their faces, rebuilt from ancient bone, we see ourselves looking back. Chapter 3. The Hunter-Gatherer World, Life Before Farming. Dawn breaks slowly over the camp. The fire has burned down to glowing coals, but it still gives warmth against the cold morning. Around it, maybe 30 people are waking up. Some stand up right away, stretching, speaking softly. Others stay under sleeping furs, stealing a few more moments of rest. There is no alarm clock, no schedule to follow, no boss to answer to. And yet, by the time the sun rises fully, everyone is moving, each person doing the work that will keep the group alive for another day. This is how most humans have lived for most of our history. The hunter-gatherer life? Some anthropologists call it the original affluent society, though others argue against that romantic label. Whatever we call it, this way of life ruled human existence for at least 290,000 years. Everything that came after, everything we call civilization, is a thin layer on top of that huge foundation. What was it really like? We cannot interview the dead. The people who lived this life left no written records, no photographs, no interviews, but we can learn from many sources. From the things they left behind, from the few hunter-gatherer societies that lasted into modern times and were studied by anthropologists, and from our own bodies and minds that evolved to succeed in this world and still carry its mark. Let us start with a basic truth. Hunter-gatherers were not farmers who just had not learned farming yet. They were not primitive or backward or stuck in an early stage. They were perfectly adapted to their way of life. They had knowledge and skills that would take modern people years to learn. They lived in complex societies with rich cultural traditions. They were, in short, successful. Think about the question of food. In the modern world, we often take food for granted. It appears on store shelves. We trade money for it. We rarely think about where it comes from or what it took to make it. For hunter-gatherers, food was the main concern of life. Every day required choices about where to search, what to chase, when to move on. These choices used huge stores of knowledge built up over generations. A skilled gatherer knew hundreds of plant species. She knew which were safe to eat and which were poisonous. She knew when each plant had fruit, where it grew, and how to prepare it to remove toxins or make it easier to digest. She knew which roots could be dug all year and which were only worth it in certain seasons. She knew which plants showed the presence of water and which warned of danger. A skilled hunter knew the behavior of every animal in the territory. He knew where they slept and where they drank. He knew their migration paths and their mating seasons. He could read tracks in dust that would be invisible to untrained eyes. He could predict where an animal would be tomorrow based on where it is today. He could decide quickly if a chase was worth the energy spent. This knowledge was not written in books. It was stored in minds and bodies, in habits and instincts, and in stories and songs that packed practical information into forms easy to remember. It was passed from parent to child, from elder to youth, through years of careful teaching. Losing this knowledge meant death. Having it meant survival. The division of labor between hunters and gatherers was not strict. Men sometimes gathered. Women sometimes hunted. But in most societies studied, men focused on hunting large animals, while women focused on gathering plant foods and small animals. This likely reflects the limits of having babies. Nursing mothers cannot easily chase prey over long distances. Children need close watching. Gathering allows childcare in ways hunting often does not. But here is an important point many popular stories miss. In most hunter-gatherer societies, gathered plant foods provided most of the calories. The famous image of the male hunter feeding the family is mostly a myth. Women's gathering work was usually more reliable and more important for calories than men's hunting. The meat men brought was valued, often highly valued, but it was not the base of the diet. How much time did people spend getting food? This question amazed anthropologists who studied living hunter-gatherer groups. The answer surprised them. In many places, adults spent only 15 to 20 hours per week on survival work, less than half the time demanded by many modern jobs. This led anthropologist Marshall Solins to famously call hunter-gatherers the original affluent society. They were affluent not because they had a lot, but because they wanted little. Their needs were simple and easy to meet. They had lots of leisure time. They were not driven by constant lack, but lived with relative plenty. This picture may be too cheerful. It came mostly from studies of groups like the Bushmen of the Kalahari living in fairly good conditions. In harsher places like subarctic regions or deserts, getting food took much more effort. And even in good times, the danger of shortage was always there. A drought, a failed hunt, a disease that wiped out local animals, any of these could turn plenty into disaster. Still, the main point remains. Hunter-gatherers were not always starving. Most of the time, they had enough, and they achieved this without the exhausting labor that would define later farming societies. What did they do with their free time? They talked, they played games, they made music and told stories. They made beautiful things that had no practical use. They built the social ties that were their most important resource. Because here is the truth about hunter-gatherer life. You could not do it alone. Individual survival was impossible. The group was everything. Think about what that meant. You lived your whole life among people who had known you since you were born. People who knew your strengths and weaknesses, your past, your character. People on whom your life truly depended. There was no hiding, no starting over in a new city, no escaping your reputation. Your social world was small, close, and extremely important. This created strong pressure to cooperate. Free riding was quickly noticed and punished. Sharing was not a choice, but a rule. The hunter who killed a large animal could not keep it for himself. Tradition required detailed rules about who got which pieces. Hoarding was shameful. Generosity was the highest virtue. We might think such small groups would be ruled by strong leaders bossing others around, but the evidence suggests the opposite. Most hunter-gatherer societies were surprisingly equal. There were no official leaders, no inherited chiefs, no one who could order others to obey. How could that work? Through what anthropologist Christopher Boehm called reverse dominance hierarchy. In these systems, the group together stops any person who tries to gather too much power or too many resources. Gossip, teasing, ridicule, social exclusion, and in extreme cases, violence, these tools were used against would-be rulers. The result was rough equality kept through constant watchfulness. This does not mean hunter-gatherer life was peaceful. It definitely was not. Violence was common. Murder rates in groups studied by anthropologists were often shockingly high by modern standards. Raids between groups killed many people. Personal fights over mates, insults, or resources often turned deadly. But this violence was personal. It was face-to-face between people who knew each other. There were no organized armies, no conquest, no enslaving of whole populations. The scale was too small. The resources worth fighting over were not stored enough to make long-term domination worth it. Let us talk about movement. Hunter-gatherers were mobile. They had to be. No single place could feed a group forever. As resources ran out or seasons changed, people moved. The pattern varied a lot. Some groups moved all the time, camping only a few days before moving again. Others set up base camps and used nearby land in a regular cycle. Still others stayed mostly in one place, living there for months or even years when resources were plenty. Mobility had huge effects. You could not pile up belongings beyond what you could carry. There was no reason to make more than you could eat or carry. Material wealth meant nothing because you could not keep it. This may be the hardest thing for modern people to understand. We live surrounded by stuff. We measure success partly by what we own. We spend huge energy getting, caring for, and worrying about our things. Hunter-gatherers did not. Their wealth was in relationships, in knowledge, in skills. A great hunter was wealthy because of what he could do, not what he owned. A respected elder was wealthy because of what she knew and who she knew. Possessions mattered very little. Some have said that this lack of stored stuff explains why hunter-gatherer societies were equal. There was simply nothing big to fight over, no land to own because everyone moved, no stored surplus to hoard, no wealth that could be used to control others. In these conditions, strong hierarchy could not grow. This began to change only when humans settled down, when movement stopped, when land became fixed and surplus could be stored. But that change lay far in the future. For hundreds of thousands of years, humans moved through the world almost like shadows. What about family? How did hunter-gatherers arrange their closest relationships? Marriage existed in some form in all known hunter-gatherer societies. Men and women formed pair bonds, often long-lasting, that included sexual exclusivity and shared support. But the forms varied widely. Some societies practiced strict monogamy. Others allowed polygyny, with successful men having multiple wives. A few allowed polyandry or other arrangements. Children were raised by the whole group. Yes, they had biological parents who cared especially for them, but the whole band helped raise children. Any adult might teach or correct any child. Older children watched younger ones. Grandparents, aunts, uncles, all played active roles. This cooperative child raising was probably essential to our species' success. Human children are helpless longer than those of any other primate. They require huge care. No mother could do this alone while also feeding herself. Help from others, especially grandmothers, made human levels of care possible. Childhood in a hunter-gatherer band was very free by modern standards. Children were rarely punished. They were allowed to follow their interests. They learned not through classrooms, but through play and watching. By the time they became teenagers, they had learned the skills they would need as adults simply by seeing and copying. Then adulthood, and the cycle continued. Marriage, children, grandchildren, death. The rhythm repeated across countless generations, each one much like the last. From our viewpoint, this life might seem boring, the same tasks day after day, the same people year after year, the same land, the same problems, the same answers. But think about what else it offered. Freedom from bosses and clocks and schedules, close relationships with everyone around you, meaningful work with a clear purpose, abundant leisure, physical health that many modern people would envy, and a bond with nature so complete that the line between self and world began to blur. We cannot go back. The world that made this life possible no longer exists, but understanding it helps us understand ourselves. We evolved for this. Our minds and bodies were shaped by hundreds of thousands of years of hunter-gatherer life. When we crave close community and find modern loneliness painful. When we feel disconnected by work whose purpose we cannot see. When we long for nature and feel trapped by walls. When our children struggle with school that fights against how they naturally learn. In all these ways, we run into the mismatch between what we evolved for and how we live now. The hunter-gatherer life was not paradise, but it was home, the first human home now gone forever. Chapter 4. The first artists, cave paintings, and the birth of creativity. September 12, 1940. Nazi Germany has occupied France for 4 months. In the countryside near the village of Montignac, far from the war and its horrors, 4 teenage boys are following a dog. The dog has disappeared down a hole, a narrow opening in the hillside that might lead to treasure, might lead to nothing. The boys widen the entrance and slide down into darkness. What they find will change how we understand human history. The walls are alive with paintings. Horses race across the stone. Bulls twist and charge. Deer leap with antlers spread wide. Red and black and yellow figures cover every surface. Hundreds of them made by hands that had been still for 17,000 years. Lascaux, the Sistine Chapel of prehistory, it would later be called. And like the Sistine Chapel, it made people look up and face something bigger than themselves. The paintings at Lascaux are not the oldest. That honor belongs to other places, caves in Indonesia and Spain, and other spots in France where images have been dated to 40,000 years or more. But Lascaux is maybe the most stunning, the most complete, the most powerful to see. Stand in that darkness. Let your eyes adjust to the flickering light of a torch or stone lamp. Watch as the figures appear from the stone, their lines sure, their forms full of life. These are not rough scratches from simple minds. These are the results of real artistic tradition, of methods improved over centuries, of eyes that saw the world with amazing clarity. The artists of Lascaux knew how to use the natural shapes of the cave walls to make 3D effects. A bump in the rock becomes a bison's shoulder. A hollow becomes a horse's flank. They knew how to mix pigments, how to apply them with brushes made of moss and hair, or blow them through hollow bones. They knew how to create the illusion of movement and life in still images on stone. And they knew how to work in total darkness, hundreds of meters from the cave entrance, in places so deep and so hidden that reaching them takes commitment and the willingness to crawl through passages barely wide enough for a human body. Why, this is the question that has haunted researchers since the first cave paintings were found in the 1800s. Why go to so much trouble? Why make art in places where almost no one would see it? The answer must be that they were seen, not by casual visitors, but by certain people for certain reasons. The caves were not museums. They were something else. Maybe temples, maybe theaters, maybe initiation places, maybe something we have no word for because the category was lost along with the culture that made it. Here is what we know. The pictures are mostly animals: horses, bison, aurochs, deer, ibex, mammoths. These were the creatures that ruled the Ice Age landscape of Europe. Some were hunted for food. Others were probably avoided as dangerous. A few were rare and mysterious. Human figures are very rare. When they appear, they are often simple stick-like shapes compared to the realistic animals. One famous image at Lascaux shows a bird-headed man falling backward in front of a wounded bison. Was this part of a myth, a record of a real event, a shaman in a trance? We simply do not know. Abstract signs also appear all over the caves: dots, lines, grids, handprints, symbols that might be nothing or might be everything. Some researchers have tried to read these as a kind of writing. Others see them as markers or signatures. The truth is still hard to grasp. What we can say is that cave art was not random. It followed patterns. Certain images appear in certain places with surprising consistency across caves separated by hundreds of miles and thousands of years. This suggests tradition. It suggests meaning. It suggests the images were not just decoration, but communication, carrying messages that the intended audience understood, but messages about what? One older theory said cave art was hunting magic. By painting the animals they wanted to kill, Ice Age hunters hoped to make the hunt successful. That idea makes sense and cannot be fully ruled out, but it has problems. The animals painted most often are not always the animals eaten most often. In many places, reindeer provided most calories, but reindeer are rarely painted. A newer theory, supported by South African archaeologist David Lewis Williams, links cave art to shamanism. In this view, deep caves were entrances to another world, a spirit world that shamans reached through trance. The images were not ordinary animals, but visions seen in changed states of consciousness. The cave walls were like thin barriers between worlds. This theory has been criticized, but it has also opened new ways to think. We know many cultures around the world have used caves for rituals. We know that sensory deprivation and confusion, the natural conditions of deep caves, can create altered states. We know that rhythm, fire, fasting, and other methods Ice Age people could use can create powerful visionary experiences. Maybe the caves were not just surfaces to paint. Maybe they were part of the art itself, the darkness, the danger, the journey, the change. The paintings were part of something bigger, something we only see in pieces. Now let us look at an earlier discovery, one that pushed the story of human art back farther than anyone expected. The Chauvet Cave was found in 1994 in southern France. Like Lascaux, it has hundreds of paintings. But when radiocarbon dating was used on the images, the results shocked researchers. Chauvet is more than 35,000 years old. That makes it almost twice as old as Lascaux. And yet, amazingly, the art at Chauvet is no rougher than later art. In some ways, it is even more advanced. The Chauvet artists used perspective. They showed animals overlapping, with those farther back drawn smaller to show distance. They showed motion with animals drawn in sequence, like frames of animation. They mastered shading with methods that would not appear again in Western art until the Renaissance. This forces a new conclusion. Art did not slowly grow from rough to refined over thousands of years. From our earliest proof, it was already skilled. The mental and technical abilities needed for realistic images were already fully developed from the start. But what was that start? When did art appear and why? The earliest known figurative art comes from caves in Sulawesi, Indonesia, where pig paintings have been dated to at least 45,000 years ago. Hand stencils from the same area may be even older. In Europe, abstract marks and simple figures come before Chauvet by thousands of years, but the more we search, the more we find. In Africa, beads made from ostrich eggshells date back 70,000 years or more. Pieces of ochre carved with geometric patterns are even older. These are not paintings, but they show the same deep abilities: the ability to represent, the desire to decorate, the making of objects meant to be symbolic, not just useful. Some researchers now argue that the ability for art, for symbolic expression in general, is tied to anatomical modernity. We became human and became artists at about the same time. The two changes are not separate, but parts of the same deep transformation. If so, art is not a luxury. It is not something we do only after we have food and safety, an extra add-on to survival. Art is woven into the fabric of being human. It is part of what makes us who we are. Think about what art requires. It requires the ability to hold an idea in your mind and work toward it over time. It requires symbolic thinking, the ability to let one thing stand for another. It requires communication, because artistic traditions must be passed from person to person. It requires a sense of beauty, the ability to notice it and aim for it. This is the same set of abilities that supports language, religion, complex group life, and new technology. Art is not separate from those achievements. It comes from the same mental structure. Wherever we find one, we often find the others. The cave painters of Lascaux and Chauvet were not lonely geniuses. They were part of traditions stretching back tens of thousands of years. They learned from teachers and taught others. They worked within shared rules while also trying new things. They were, in other words, artists in the full modern sense, and their art was not only for looking. Evidence suggests it was performed. Recent sound studies of painted caves have found that the most painted areas often have the best acoustics. Places where the rock naturally amplifies and echoes sound are also places where the art is thickest. This is not an accident. The caves were chosen and painted partly because of how they sounded. Imagine entering Lascaux not in silence, but in song, drums echoing under the low ceilings, voices raised in chants whose words are lost forever, firelight throwing moving shadows across the painted walls, making the animals seem to run. The line between image and reality melting away. The cave coming alive. We know Ice Age people made musical instruments. Flutes carved from bone have been found across Europe, some dating back 40,000 years. These instruments make sounds strangely similar to modern flutes. The makers understood sound. They understood melody. They made music. Now connect the clues, the deep caves with their otherworldly feeling, the animals painted more alive than life, the music and the firelight, the separation from the everyday world. Something was happening in these places, something that mattered deeply to the people there. We call it art because we have no better word. But it was probably more than that. It was ritual. It was religion. It was a place where humans faced the biggest questions. Who are we? Where do we come from? What happens when we die? What is the connection between the human and the animal, the living and the dead, the visible and the invisible? The answers the cave painters gave are lost. But the questions remain. They echo down 30,000 years and still ask us. Pablo Picasso reportedly visited Lascaux soon after it was found and came out shaken. "We have invented nothing," he is said to have said. "Everything was already there." He was right. The first artists had already mastered the basics. They knew how to see and how to show. They knew images could carry meaning beyond themselves. They knew the act of making something was itself a kind of magic. They knew, in short, what it meant to be human, and they painted that knowledge onto the walls of the earth, where it would wait in darkness for 17,000 years, waiting for children and their dog to find it again. Chapter 5. Surviving the ice, humanity, and the glacial world. The ice is coming slowly at first, then faster and faster. Glaciers creep down from the mountains. Great ice sheets spread south from the Arctic, crushing everything beneath them into rubble. Temperatures fall. Sea levels drop as water becomes trapped as ice. The world changes. This happened again and again during the Pleistocene epoch, the geologic period that began about 2 million years ago and ended only 12,000 years ago. Huge cycles of freezing and warming, driven by changes in Earth's orbit, reshaped the planet over and over. Forests became tundra. Grasslands became desert. Coastlines moved in and out by hundreds of kilometers. And through it all, humans survived. Not just survived, thrived, spread, and took over environments that should have been impossible for a tropical African species. How? This question goes to the heart of what makes us human. The last glacial maximum, the coldest part of the most recent ice age, happened about 26,000 to 19,000 years ago. At its peak, global temperatures were maybe 5 to 7 degrees colder than today. Huge ice sheets covered much of North America and northern Europe. The ice was sometimes 3 km thick. Its weight pressed the land down. For humans living in Europe then, life was brutal. Much of the continent was covered by ice or tundra, too cold and dry for humans to live easily. People pulled back to refugia, safer areas in southern Europe where survival was possible. The Iberian Peninsula, the Italian Peninsula, the Balkans, small pockets across a harsh land. But newer research suggests something surprising. Not all humans retreated. Some groups apparently stayed in Central Europe through the worst cold, living in conditions other species could not stand. They survived like wolves and bears, adapted to the cold, unwilling to leave land they had claimed. How could this happen? The answer includes both biological and cultural adaptation. Biologically, humans are not built well for cold. We have no fur. We have relatively little body fat. Our bare skin loses heat easily, which helps in hot climates but hurts in cold ones. By all logic, we should have stayed in warm zones, but culture made up for biology. Clothing was the key. The sewing needle, a tiny tool with huge meaning, appears in the archaeological record about 30,000 years ago. Made from bone or ivory and threaded with sinew, these needles let humans make fitted clothing for the first time. Not loose skins, but tailored clothes cut to shape and sewn tight to keep heat in. Think about what that takes. You must kill animals. You must skin them, prepare the hides so they do not rot. You must cut skins into shapes. You must punch holes and sew them together. Every step needs tools, skills, and knowledge passed down through generations. The result was like carrying your own environment with you. An Ice Age wardrobe might include many layers. Inner clothes against the skin to trap heat, middle layers for insulation, outer layers of waterproof hide to block wind and wet. Hoods and mittens and boots, each part carefully designed to do its job. We know from frozen remains that Ice Age people dressed much like modern Arctic peoples. When the body of a man who died 45,000 years ago was found in Siberian permafrost, he wore tailored clothing that is the same basic idea as what Inuit people wear today. The technology was already old, but clothing alone was not enough. Humans also needed shelter, fire, and most of all, food. The Mammoth Steppe, the huge grassland that covered northern Eurasia during the Ice Ages, was one of the richest environments on Earth. Herds of woolly mammoth, woolly rhinoceros, bison, horses, and reindeer roamed in numbers hard to imagine today. These animals gave humans what they needed: meat for food, hides for clothing and shelter, bones for tools and fuel. Yes, fuel. In a world with few trees, people burned bones. The big bones of mammoths, rich in fat, burned slowly and gave off a lot of heat. Mammoth bone huts have been found across Eastern Europe, shelters built from hundreds of bones set in careful patterns. These were not quick camps, but strong homes meant for long stays. Hunting big animals was central to Ice Age survival, but it was not easy. Mammoths and bison and rhinoceroses are dangerous prey. Killing them needed teamwork, planning, and special tools. The spear thrower, or atlatl, appeared during this time. It made the arm longer, letting hunters throw spears much harder and farther than bare hands could. A skilled person could hit targets 30 m away with enough force to pierce thick hide. Hunting plans became smarter. Evidence suggests that Ice Age hunters used knowledge of animal behavior to predict movement and set ambushes. They may have driven herds toward cliffs or into prepared traps. They may have used snares. They cooperated across group boundaries, organizing hunts with dozens or even hundreds of people. The social planning needed for large-scale hunting was itself an adaptation. Humans became better at working together, at sharing plans, at organizing chains of command when needed. These skills would matter far beyond hunting. But the Ice Age did more than test humans, it also separated them. When sea levels fell, land bridges appeared. The Bering Land Bridge connected Asia to North America. Similar bridges connected Britain to mainland Europe, Australia to New Guinea, Japan to mainland Asia. These allowed migration, letting humans spread into new lands. But the ice sheets themselves became barriers. Groups separated by glaciers could not easily share mates or ideas. Genetic and cultural differences grew faster. The scattered human population began to split into distinct groups, ancestors of the regional populations we know today. This separation had results. Bottlenecks, times when population dropped to dangerously low numbers, left genetic marks that we can still see today. Some researchers think the human population may have fallen to just a few thousand individuals at certain times, close to extinction. The supervolcano at Toba, which erupted about 74,000 years ago, may have caused one such bottleneck. This eruption, one of the largest in the last 2 million years, threw huge amounts of ash and sulfur into the air. A volcanic winter followed, lasting maybe 6 to 10 years. Temperatures fell, plants died, animal numbers crashed. Humans who survived the Toba disaster, if it was a disaster, must have survived through luck, flexibility, and cooperation. The genetic evidence suggests a severe population drop, though not everyone agrees about its timing or cause. What is clear is that our ancestors made it through, that the line did not break, that we exist because they found a way. The Ice Ages also taught humans about change. No earlier species had faced climate swings this huge, while also having the brain power to remember and respond. Elders who had seen warmer times could tell the young about the difference. Knowledge could be saved and passed on about conditions that no longer existed but might return. This awareness of time, this sense of deep time, may have helped create more culture. If the world could change, if the familiar could become strange, if the ancestors had lived differently than the present group, then maybe the future could also be different. Maybe humans could shape that future through deliberate action. The end of the Ice Age came fairly fast. Starting around 19,000 years ago, temperatures began to rise. The great ice sheets pulled back. Sea levels rose. Coasts that had been dry land for thousands of years flooded. The Mammoth Steppe, that rich grassland, changed into taiga and tundra. Many of the great animals went extinct. The causes of these megafaunal extinctions are still debated. Climate change certainly played a role. The environments that supported mammoths and mastodons disappeared as the Ice Age ended. But human hunting likely contributed as well. Many extinctions line up suspiciously with human arrival in previously unoccupied regions. The pattern suggests that animals not used to human hunters were especially vulnerable. Whatever the cause, the world that emerged from the Ice Age was poorer compared to what had existed before. Fewer large animals meant fewer calories available from hunting. Humans would need to find new strategies, new food sources, new ways of living. Those new ways would lead eventually to agriculture, to cities, to civilization. The transition was just beginning as the ice retreated. A transition that would transform everything. But that is a story for later. For now, let us remain in the glacial world a moment longer. Picture a night during the last glacial maximum. The stars blaze overhead, unfaded by light pollution that will not exist for another 20,000 years. The cold bites exposed skin. Somewhere in the distance, wolves howl in a shelter of mammoth bone and hide. A fire burns. Around it, a family huddles for warmth. They speak in a language no modern ear would understand. They tell stories of ancestors who lived when the ice was farther south, when the animals were more numerous, when finding food was easier. They do not know they are watching an ending, that within a few thousand years the world they know will vanish, that their descendants will live in ways they could not imagine. They know only this moment, the fire, the cold, the faces of those they love, the challenge of surviving another day. They have been meeting that challenge for a very long time, and they will keep meeting it until the ice releases its grip and a new world begins. Their resilience is our inheritance. The creativity and determination that brought them through the frozen millennia lives on in us. When we face our own challenges, our own changing world, our own uncertain future, we draw on abilities forged in Ice Age crucibles. We are the children of survivors. We carry their triumph in our genes. The Ice Age was not just an obstacle to be endured. It was a teacher, and its lessons shaped who we became. Chapter 6. The Great Migrations, How Humans Conquered the Earth. They stood at the edge of everything they knew. Behind them lay Africa, the continent where their ancestors had lived for hundreds of thousands of years. The land of their birth, the graves of their dead, the only home their species had ever known. Before them lay something else, a world without humans. A world of unknown dangers and unknown opportunities. A world that would become theirs. The migration out of Africa is perhaps the most consequential journey in human history. From a single population on a single continent, humans spread to occupy every land mass on Earth except Antarctica. They adapted to deserts and rainforests, to mountains and coastlines, to Arctic tundra and tropical islands. They became the most widespread large animal the planet has ever seen. And they did it on foot, one step at a time, generation after generation, not knowing where they were going, not knowing what they would find. Let us follow them. The Exodus probably began around 70,000 years ago, though some evidence suggests earlier attempts that ultimately failed. The route most likely crossed the Bab el-Mandeb Strait at the southern end of the Red Sea, where the distance between Africa and Arabia was shortest. During periods of low sea level, the crossing may have been as little as 20 km, possible on simple rafts, possible even by wading at low tide. The migrants who made this crossing were not explorers in any conscious sense. They were not setting out to discover new lands. They were following food, following water, following the same impulses that had driven human movement within Africa for hundreds of thousands of years. But this time the movement took them beyond, into Arabia, into the Near East, and from there in every direction the land allowed. The coastal route seems to have been primary. Humans spread along the shores of the Indian Ocean, using the relatively steady resources of the coast. Shellfish, fish, seabirds, and their eggs. The coast offered predictable food in a way the interior did not. This coastal migration was remarkably fast by prehistoric standards. Within perhaps 10 to 20,000 years, humans had reached Southeast Asia. Within perhaps another 10,000, they had crossed the water gap separating the mainland from Australia and New Guinea. The Australian colonization required seafaring. The water barriers, even at the lowest sea level, were too wide to wade or swim. Humans built boats, probably simple rafts or canoes, and deliberately set out across open water toward a land they could not see. Try to imagine this. You live in a world without maps, without navigation instruments, without any certainty that land exists beyond the horizon. And yet you get in a boat and paddle into the unknown. What drives such a decision? Curiosity, desperation, spiritual calling, we will never know. But someone made that journey and their descendants became the Aboriginal Australians, one of the oldest continuous cultures on Earth. The dates for Australian arrival have been pushed steadily earlier as new evidence emerges. Current estimates suggest humans reached Australia between 65,000 and 50,000 years ago. This means Aboriginal Australians have been in Australia for at least 25 generations. The depth of that connection to land is difficult for more mobile peoples to comprehend. Meanwhile, other branches of the migrating population moved in different directions. Some turned north into Central Asia. Some turned west toward Europe. The timeline and routes of these movements are still being worked out. But the general pattern is clear. Europe was not empty when modern humans arrived. The Neanderthals had lived there for hundreds of thousands of years. They were cold-adapted, physically powerful, and possessed sophisticated tool technology. They were, in other words, formidable competitors. What happened when modern humans met Neanderthals? The old story was simple replacement. Superior modern humans outcompeted inferior Neanderthals, who went extinct. But the truth, as shown by ancient DNA analysis, is more complex. Modern humans and Neanderthals interbred. The evidence is written in our genomes. Most people of non-African descent carry between 1% and 4% Neanderthal DNA. This means that somewhere, sometime, our ancestors and Neanderthals had children together. Those children survived and reproduced. Their descendants are us. The interbreeding was probably not extensive. The populations remained largely separate, but enough mixing occurred to leave a permanent genetic legacy. Some of the Neanderthal genes we carry may even have been helpful, aiding our ancestors in adapting to European climates and diseases. Still, by around 40,000 years ago, Neanderthals were gone. Whatever combination of competition, climate change, disease, and demographic disadvantage led to their extinction, the result was a world with only one human species remaining. The colonization of the Americas came last. The Bering Land Bridge connecting Asia to Alaska during periods of low sea level provided the route, but the timing remains hotly debated. For decades, the consensus held that humans entered the Americas around 13,000 years ago, following an ice-free corridor that opened between the great glaciers covering Canada. These were the Clovis people, named for distinctive stone tools first found near Clovis, New Mexico. But evidence for earlier occupation has accumulated. Sites in Chile, in Florida, and in other locations across the hemisphere have yielded dates older than Clovis. Most dramatically, fossilized footprints discovered at White Sands National Park in New Mexico have been dated to around 23,000 years ago. If accurate, this pushes back human arrival in the Americas by 10,000 years. How did people reach the interior of North America when ice sheets blocked the way? The coastal route hypothesis suggests they traveled by boat along the Pacific coast, using marine resources, gradually working their way south. The ice would have been to their left, open water to their right. It would have been a hard journey but possible. Whatever the timing, once humans reached the Americas, they spread rapidly. Within a few thousand years of first arrival, people had reached the southern tip of South America. Every habitable environment on the continents was occupied. The last great land masses joined the human domain. What drove this expansion? Population pressure probably played a role. Successful populations grow, and growing populations need more territory. But population pressure alone does not explain the speed and extent of human dispersal. Humans seem to possess an inborn restlessness, a curiosity about what lies beyond the next hill. This may be built into our nature. The individuals willing to explore new territory, to take risks, to leave the known for the unknown may have had reproductive advantages over those who stayed put. Over time, this would have selected for wanderlust. The consequences of migration were profound. As populations spread and adapted to new environments, they diverged. Skin color changed in response to varying levels of ultraviolet radiation. Body proportions shifted in response to climate. Lactose tolerance evolved in populations that domesticated milk-producing animals. Genetic and physical diversity increased as people moved into every corner of the planet. Cultural diversity exploded as well. Isolated populations developed distinct languages, distinct customs, distinct ways of understanding the world. By the time different branches of humanity reconnected through trade and exploration in recent millennia, they had become unrecognizably different from one another. Yet beneath the differences, the shared humanity remained. We were all still one species. We could still interbreed. We could still, with effort, understand each other. The migrations also had ecological consequences. Wherever humans arrived, megafauna tended to disappear. The pattern is too consistent to be coincidence. Australia lost its giant marsupials shortly after human arrival. The Americas lost mammoths and mastodons and giant ground sloths and saber-toothed cats. Madagascar lost giant lemurs. New Zealand lost moas. Island after island, continent after continent, the largest animals vanished. Climate change undoubtedly contributed. The end of the Ice Age disrupted ecosystems worldwide, but human hunting seems to have delivered the final blow to many species. Animals that had evolved without human predators had no instinctive fear of us. They were easy prey, and human hunters armed with sophisticated weapons and coordinated hunting strategies were devastatingly effective. We remade the world. Long before agriculture, long before cities, long before any of the things we associate with civilization, humans had already transformed the planet. We had spread everywhere. We had driven dozens of species to extinction. We had left our mark on every ecosystem we touched. The Great Migrations show both the best and worst of human nature. The courage to face the unknown, the ingenuity to survive in hostile environments, the cooperation that made large-scale movement possible, but also the impact, the disruption, the loss that followed wherever we went. We are not visitors on this earth. We are shapers of it. We have been shaping it for a very long time. The migrations continued even after every continent was occupied. Within continents, populations moved and mixed and diverged and reconnected. The pattern never stopped. It continues today as people flee wars and seek opportunities and follow love across borders and oceans. The restlessness that sent those first migrants across the Bab el-Mandeb Strait still burns in us. We are a species on the move. We always have been, and perhaps we always will be. Perhaps the next great migration will take us beyond this planet entirely to other worlds, other stars. If so, we will carry with us the legacy of all those who walked before. The first African wanderers, the coastal migrants of Australia, the Ice Age hunters of Europe, the first Americans. Their journey is our journey, their story is our story, and it is far from over. Chapter 7. What did they believe? Spirituality before religion. The child has died. Perhaps illness, perhaps injury, perhaps simply the cruel randomness of a world without medicine. The small body lies still, and around it adults gather with grief written on their faces. What happens next? In the modern world, we have rituals for death, funerals and burials and cremations, words spoken over the departed, beliefs about what comes after. These rituals vary enormously across cultures, but their presence is universal. Every known human society has some way of marking death, some framework for understanding it. Did our prehistoric ancestors share this? Did people who lived 50,000, 100,000, 200,000 years ago believe in something beyond the visible world? Did they imagine souls, spirits, and afterlife? Did they, in short, have religion? The evidence suggests they did. Or at least they had something that looked like religion, something that served similar functions, something that addressed the same fundamental questions that religions address today. Let us begin with burial. The deliberate interment of the dead is one of the clearest signs of symbolic thinking. Animals do not bury their dead. They may grieve, may return to bodies, may show signs of distress, but they do not dig graves. They do not place objects with corpses. They do not engage in the sustained, effortful behavior that characterizes human burial. The earliest known burials date back roughly 100,000 years. At sites like Lascaux and Kafze in Israel, anatomically modern humans were laid to rest in deliberate positions, some with objects placed beside them. These were not casual disposals. These were intentional acts carried out according to some plan expressing some meaning. What meaning? This is where certainty fails us. The dead cannot tell us what the living believed. The objects cannot interpret themselves. We are left with inferences, educated guesses, comparisons to later cultures whose beliefs we know more about. But the inferences point in consistent directions. When you bury the dead with goods, with food, with tools, you seem to be preparing them for something. A journey, a continued existence, an afterlife of some kind. Why else would a corpse need provisions? The Neanderthals also buried their dead at sites like Lascaux Saints in France and Shanidar Cave in Iraq. Neanderthal remains were found in positions suggesting deliberate interment. The Shanidar burials famously included pollen from flowering plants, suggesting that flowers had been placed with the body. Though this interpretation has been questioned, the burials themselves seem genuine. What did Neanderthals believe? We cannot know for certain. Their cognitive capacities were different from ours in ways we are only beginning to understand. But the fact that they buried their dead at all suggests some framework for understanding death, some way of marking the transition from living person to something else. As we move into the Upper Paleolithic, the evidence for spiritual belief becomes richer and more complex. The cave paintings we discussed earlier almost certainly had spiritual dimensions. The deep caves, with their disorienting darkness and strange acoustics, seem to have been treated as special places. The images painted there were probably not merely decorative, but meaningful in ways connected to invisible realities. The Venus figurines offer another window into prehistoric belief. These small sculptures of women emphasizing breasts and hips and bellies have been found across Europe and into Asia, dating from roughly 40,000 to 10,000 years ago. They are remarkably consistent in style despite being separated by thousands of miles and thousands of years. What did they represent? Theories abound. Fertility goddesses, symbols of womanhood, pornography carved by lonely hunters, self-portraits made by pregnant women, ritual objects used in ceremonies we cannot reconstruct. Each theory may capture something. None captures everything. What seems clear is that these were not random carvings. They were made according to conventions. They were valued enough to be carried from place to place. They meant something to the people who made and used them. The emergence of personal ornaments also suggests spiritual life. Beads made from shells, teeth, bones, and stones appear in the archaeological record, starting perhaps 100,000 years ago. These ornaments served no practical function. They were purely symbolic markers of identity or status or group membership. But ornaments may also have had spiritual dimensions. In many later cultures, certain objects were believed to carry power. Amulets protected against evil. Talismans brought good luck. Sacred objects connected their wearers to supernatural forces. It seems likely that similar beliefs attached to at least some prehistoric ornaments. The concept of shamanism offers a framework for understanding prehistoric spirituality. Shamanism is found in cultures across the world, from Siberia to South America, from Africa to Australia. Its core elements are remarkably consistent. Certain individuals, through training or natural gift, can enter altered states of consciousness. In these states, they travel to spirit worlds, communicate with supernatural beings, and return with knowledge or power beneficial to the community. Many researchers believe that shamanism, or something like it, was the original human religion. The cave paintings may depict shamanic visions. The animal-headed figures sometimes shown may represent shamans in trance, experiencing themselves as transformed into animal form. The deep caves themselves may have been sites for inducing the altered states that shamans sought. This is speculation, but it is informed speculation. The neurological capacity for altered states is universal in humans. The techniques for inducing such states, including rhythmic drumming, fasting, sensory deprivation, and psychoactive substances, were all available to prehistoric peoples. The experiences themselves, vivid and apparently meaningful, would have demanded interpretation. Shamanism provides one coherent framework for making sense of them. If shamanism was indeed the original religion, it had certain characteristics worth noting. It was not institutionalized. There were no temples, no priesthoods, no written scriptures. Authority came from personal experience, from demonstrated ability to enter trance and return with valuable information. Anyone could potentially become a shaman. The role was earned, not inherited. Shamanic religion was also tied to the natural world in ways that later religions often were not. The spirits encountered in trance were typically animal spirits, nature spirits, ancestors. The sacred places were caves, groves, mountains, rivers. The boundary between human and natural was porous, constantly crossed in both directions. This does not mean prehistoric people worshipped nature in any simple sense. Worship is a complex concept that may not apply, but they seem to have experienced the world as alive with powers and presences that demanded acknowledgement. They lived in a world populated by beings that moderns would call supernatural, but that they may have experienced as simply part of reality. How did these beliefs affect daily life? Again, we must extrapolate from later cultures, but some patterns seem likely. Rituals would have marked important transitions: birth, puberty, marriage, death, the changes of seasons, the start and end of hunts, the arrival and departure of migratory animals. Each transition would have been accompanied by appropriate actions, words, offerings. Taboos would have regulated behavior. Certain foods forbidden, certain places avoided, certain actions prohibited at certain times. These rules would have been understood not as arbitrary conventions, but as responses to the fundamental nature of reality. Breaking a taboo was not merely disobeying a social rule. It was disturbing the cosmic order with potentially dangerous consequences. Illness and misfortune would have been understood in spiritual terms. When someone fell sick, when a hunt failed, when disaster struck, the question was not just how, but why. What spirit had been offended? What taboo broken? What malevolent force was at work? Healing required addressing these spiritual causes, not just the physical symptoms. This way of understanding the world is often called animism, the belief that spirits inhabit all things. Rivers have spirits, trees have spirits, animals have spirits. The land itself is alive with presences that can help or harm, that must be respected and propitiated. This view was probably universal among prehistoric peoples and remains common in traditional societies today. For modern materialists, animism seems like a primitive error, a failure to understand the mechanical nature of reality. But animism had its own logic and its own functions. It encouraged respect for the natural world. It provided explanations for otherwise incomprehensible events. It created frameworks for social solidarity, shared beliefs that bound communities together. And perhaps animism captured something true that materialism misses: the hard problem of consciousness. The mystery of how subjective experience arises from physical matter remains unsolved. Perhaps the ancestors were not entirely wrong to see awareness everywhere. Perhaps the universe is more alive than our science currently admits. But this is philosophy, and we have strayed from history. Let us return to the prehistoric world. The spiritual beliefs of our ancestors shaped their lives profoundly. They provided meaning in a universe that might otherwise have seemed arbitrary and hostile. They connected individuals to communities, and communities to ancestors, and ancestors to the land. They offered hope in the face of death, the belief that something continued, that existence did not simply end. These beliefs were not separate from practical life. They were woven through it. The hunt was a spiritual as well as a practical activity. The gathering of plants involved knowledge of their spiritual properties as well as their nutritional ones. Every action had dimensions that extended beyond the visible into the invisible. We have largely lost this way of being in the world. We have separated the sacred from the secular, confined religion to certain times and places, stripped the natural world of spiritual significance. Whether this represents progress or loss is a question each must answer for themselves. But the capacity for spiritual experience remains. We still wonder about the meaning of life and death. We still seek connection to something larger than ourselves. We still feel awe in the presence of vast mountains and starry skies. The impulses that led our ancestors to paint caves and bury their dead with care still move within us. We are spiritual beings. We always have been. The forms change, but the underlying need persists. And perhaps in that persistence lies something important. Perhaps the universal human need for meaning is itself a clue. Perhaps it points toward realities that science cannot measure, but that matter nonetheless. The ancestors would not have been surprised by this thought. They knew what we are only beginning to remember. The world is more than matter, and we are more than machines. Chapter 8. Lost technologies and forgotten knowledge. The stone fits perfectly in the hand. Its edges are sharp enough to cut hide, slice meat, scrape wood. It has been worked with precision. Each flake struck at exactly the right angle to produce exactly the right shape. This is not crude bashing. This is craft. For most of human history, stone was our primary material. The Stone Age, we call this vast stretch of time, as though stone were primitive, the best our ancestors could manage before they discovered better things. But stonework was not a fallback. It was a technology refined over hundreds of thousands of years, demanding skills that most modern people could not hope to acquire. Pick up a rock, any rock. Now try to shape it into a useful tool. You will quickly discover how difficult this is. The stone does not cooperate. It fractures unpredictably. Sharp edges crumble. Shapes come out wrong. Without instruction, without practice, without the accumulated knowledge of generations, you will produce nothing useful. Our ancestors were masters of stone. They understood fracture mechanics in their bones, if not in their minds. They knew which types of stone would flake cleanly and which would shatter. They knew how to prepare cores, those pieces of stone from which tools were struck. They knew dozens of techniques for producing dozens of tool types, each suited to particular tasks. The Alduin tradition, the oldest recognized stone tool industry, dates back roughly 2.5 million years. These early tools were simple, cobbles struck to produce sharp edges. But even this simplicity required insight. Someone had to realize that striking a stone could produce something useful. Someone had to teach others. A tradition had to form and persist across generations. The Acheulean tradition, emerging around 1 and 3/4 million years ago, brought a new level of sophistication. The hand axe, that teardrop-shaped tool found across Africa and Eurasia, became the dominant form. Making a hand axe required shaping stone on both sides, maintaining symmetry, thinking ahead to the final product. This was not opportunistic flaking, but deliberate manufacture. The Acheulean lasted for over 1 million years with relatively little change. This is often cited as evidence that early humans lacked creativity, that they were stuck in cognitive grooves, unable to innovate. But consider another interpretation. The Acheulean hand axe worked. It was a supremely effective multi-purpose tool. Why would you change something that worked? The stability of the Acheulean may reflect not cognitive limitation, but practical success. The Mousterian tradition, associated primarily with Neanderthals but also with early modern humans, introduced prepared core technology. In this approach, a core was carefully shaped before flakes were struck from it. The shape of the final flake could be predetermined. This required planning several steps ahead, holding a mental template while executing a complex sequence of actions. The Upper Paleolithic brought an explosion of tool diversity. Blades, long, thin flakes struck from prepared cores, became the basic unit of stone tool production. From these blades, specialized tools were crafted. Burins for engraving, scrapers for hide, points for spears, and later arrows, drills, awls, needles. The toolkit expanded enormously, but stone was not the only material. Bone, antler, and ivory joined the technological repertoire. These materials could be shaped in ways stone could not. They could be carved and polished. They could be bent without breaking. They could be split into long, thin sections for needles and points. The combination of stone and organic materials enabled new possibilities. Consider the needle. This tiny tool, mentioned earlier in connection with clothing, represents a remarkable achievement. Making a bone needle requires splitting a suitable bone, shaping a blank, grinding it smooth, and perforating it with a hole to thread, small enough to hold but large enough to be practical. Each step demands precision. The finished product is fragile and easily lost. Yet needles were made by the thousands, enabling the tailored clothing that allowed humans to survive Ice Age winters. The spear thrower amplified human power. This simple device, a stick with a hook at one end to engage the butt of a spear, effectively extended the arm. The physics were elegant. The additional leverage translated into greater velocity and distance. A skilled user could throw a spear twice as far, and with far greater force than unaided arms could manage. The bow and arrow pushed this logic further. By storing energy in a bent stave and releasing it suddenly, archers could reach velocities otherwise impossible. With thrown spears, arrows could be made smaller and lighter than spears, allowing hunters to carry more ammunition. The accuracy was greater, the range was greater. The bow was perhaps the most sophisticated projectile weapon ever invented prior to gunpowder. Fire was arguably the most important technology of all. Control of fire gave humans warmth, light, protection, and the ability to cook food. Cooking transformed human nutrition. It broke down tough plant fibers. It made meat more digestible. It killed parasites and pathogens. It may have been crucial to the evolution of our large, energy-hungry brains. We do not know when humans first controlled fire. Evidence for fire use extends back at least 1 million years, possibly further. But regular controlled fire made and maintained at will rather than captured from natural sources, may have developed more recently. By 100,000 years ago, fire was certainly a standard part of human life. The knowledge required to make fire from scratch is not trivial. You need to understand friction or percussion. You need appropriate materials. Dry tinder, kindling, fuel. You need technique, the right motion, the right pressure, the right timing. You need patience, because fire starting by primitive methods can take a long time. And you need to maintain the fire once started, feeding it, sheltering it from wind and rain. This knowledge was passed from generation to generation. It could not be discovered independently by each individual. It was cultural patrimony essential for survival, carefully taught and carefully learned. We should also consider knowledge that left no material trace. The ancestors knew their environments with an intimacy that modern people can barely imagine. They knew which plants were edible, which were medicinal, which were poisonous. They knew the behaviors of animals, their habits and habitats, their seasonal movements. They knew water sources and landmarks, travel routes and camping sites. They knew weather patterns, star positions, the signs that predicted rain or drought. This ecological knowledge was encyclopedic in scope. Ethnographic studies of recent hunter-gatherers have documented knowledge systems of remarkable depth and detail. A single individual might know hundreds of plant species, their uses, their locations, their seasons. This was not casual awareness, but precise practical knowledge on which survival depended. Navigational knowledge allowed humans to move across vast landscapes without maps or compasses. Aboriginal Australians navigated using songlines, routes encoded in songs that described landmarks, water sources, and travel times. The songs were also creation narratives, stories of ancestral beings who shaped the land. Practical knowledge and spiritual meaning were woven together. Medical knowledge existed long before formal medicine. Herbal remedies for various ailments were part of every traditional culture's inheritance. Some of these remedies were effective. Modern pharmacology has discovered valuable compounds in plants that traditional peoples had used for generations. The ancestors may not have understood biochemistry, but they understood what worked. Midwifery practices ensured that most births succeeded despite the absence of hospitals and modern obstetrics. Techniques for managing childbirth, for positioning, for dealing with complications, were passed from experienced women to younger ones. This knowledge saved countless lives. Construction knowledge allowed humans to build shelters suited to their environments. From the mammoth bone huts of the Ukrainian plains to the brush shelters of African savannas, people knew how to create protection from the elements. The techniques varied with available materials, but the underlying principles were consistent. Structures needed to shed rain, resist wind, maintain comfortable temperatures. Achieving these goals with primitive materials required genuine engineering insight. Boat-building knowledge carried humans across water barriers that would otherwise have blocked movement. We know that people reached Australia by boat at least 50,000 years ago. The boats themselves have not survived, but they must have existed. Someone invented watercraft, someone improved them, someone taught others to build and use them. A maritime tradition emerged and persisted. All of this knowledge existed without writing. It was stored in living minds and transmitted through speech, demonstration, and practice. When a knowledgeable person died, some of what they knew died with them, unless it had been passed on. The fragility of oral tradition meant that knowledge was constantly at risk. But the robustness of culture meant that essential knowledge usually survived, repeated across many minds, reinforced by constant use. We have inherited remarkably little of this ancestral knowledge. Modern people could not survive in a natural environment using prehistoric methods. The skills are too difficult, the knowledge too extensive, the learning curve too steep. We have traded breadth for depth, general competence for specialized expertise. We know things our ancestors could not have imagined, but we have forgotten things they knew in their bones. This is not simply a matter of choosing not to learn. The environments in which traditional knowledge applied have largely been destroyed. The plants and animals the ancestors knew are often extinct or displaced. The landscapes have been transformed. Even if we wanted to learn the old ways, we often could not. But something of that ancestral competence remains within us. The ability to learn practical skills, to read environments, to solve problems with available materials. These abilities are part of our inheritance. Under the right conditions, they emerge. People stranded in wilderness sometimes discover abilities they did not know they had. The knowledge is not there, but the capacity to acquire knowledge is. The ancestors live on in our potential, if not in our practice. And perhaps we should think more carefully about what we have lost. The specialist knowledge of modern civilization is powerful but fragile. It depends on complex systems that could fail. The generalist competence of our ancestors was less powerful, but more robust. It worked anywhere, anytime, with whatever materials were at hand. In a world of increasing complexity and increasing risk, the old ways may have something to teach us, not as a replacement for modern knowledge, but as a supplement, a reminder that humans can thrive with less, that survival does not require electricity or petroleum or global supply chains, that our ancestors faced challenges at least as severe as ours and found ways to endure. Their technologies were not primitive. They were appropriate, matched to their environments, their materials, their needs. The appropriateness is what we should admire, the skill and knowledge that lay behind apparent simplicity. Those skills took hundreds of thousands of years to develop. They represented the accumulated wisdom of countless generations. They should not be dismissed as primitive or forgotten as irrelevant. They are part of who we are, and we are poorer for having lost them. Chapter 9. The Dawn of Civilization, Why Everything Changed. For 290,000 years, give or take, humans lived as hunter-gatherers. Then, in a geological eye blink, everything changed. Within a few thousand years, scattered across multiple continents, people began to do something radically new. They began to farm. The Neolithic Revolution, as it came to be called, was not a single event, but a process. It happened independently in at least half a dozen places. The Fertile Crescent of the Middle East, the Yellow River Valley of China, the highlands of New Guinea, Mesoamerica, the Andes, West Africa. In each location, local plants and animals were domesticated. In each location, the transition from foraging to farming transformed human life. Why? This is one of the great questions of human history. Why would people abandon a way of life that had served them for hundreds of thousands of years? Why would they adopt a lifestyle that was, by many measures, worse? Because farming was worse, at least initially, at least for the farmers themselves. The skeletons tell the story. Compared to hunter-gatherers, early farmers were shorter. Their bones show more signs of nutritional stress. Their teeth were worse, worn down by the carbohydrates that now dominated their diets. They suffered from more infectious diseases, probably transmitted from the animals they now lived among. They worked longer hours for less varied food. The evidence is consistent across cultures and continents. Wherever agriculture replaced foraging, health declined. The supposed benefits of civilization came at a heavy biological cost. So why did it happen? One answer is that people did not choose. Circumstances forced the transition. As the Ice Age ended and climates shifted, the environments that had supported hunting and gathering changed. Game animals disappeared or moved. Plant communities transformed. The old ways no longer worked as well as they once had. At the same time, population had been growing. More people meant more pressure on resources. The landscape could no longer support everyone in the old way. Something had to give. In this view, agriculture was a survival strategy, not a preference. People turned to farming because they had to, because the alternatives had become untenable. It was not progress but desperation. There is surely truth in this account. Climate change at the end of the Ice Age was dramatic. The megafaunal extinctions removed important food sources. Human populations had indeed grown during the relatively stable conditions of the Upper Paleolithic. The pressures were real, but this cannot be the whole story. Agriculture developed independently in multiple locations at somewhat different times under varying conditions. The coincidence seems too neat if climate and population were the only factors. Another theory emphasizes social and cultural dynamics. Perhaps farming arose not from necessity, but from desire. Not the desire for more food, but the desire for more status, more power, more of the things that confer social advantage. Consider feasting. In many traditional societies, ambitious individuals gain prestige by hosting lavish feasts. The ability to provide abundant food demonstrates power and creates obligations in those who attend. A successful feast maker accumulates social capital that can be converted into other forms of influence. Feasting requires surplus. You cannot host a feast if you barely have enough food for yourself. Wild resources, while sufficient for subsistence, may not be sufficient for the quantities required to make a social impression. Agriculture, however, can produce surplus. It can produce more food per unit of land than foraging, even if the nutritional quality is lower. For an ambitious individual seeking to throw the biggest feast, to outdo rivals, to climb the social ladder, farming offered possibilities that foraging did not. In this view, agriculture was driven not by hunger, but by ambition. The first farmers were not desperate foragers, but social competitors willing to work harder and eat worse in exchange for the prestige that surplus could buy. There is evidence supporting this view. Some of the earliest agricultural sites show signs of feasting and communal gathering. The famous site of Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, dating to around 11,000 years ago, consists of massive stone circles that appear to have been ritual gathering places. The labor required to build these structures was enormous. The people who built them may have needed agricultural surplus to support the workforce. Religion and social competition may have driven agriculture as much as nutritional need. A third theory emphasizes knowledge and accident. Humans had been manipulating their environments for a long time before agriculture proper began. They burned landscapes to encourage favored plants. They transported seeds from place to place. They protected certain resources and exploited others. They had intimate knowledge of plant life cycles and animal behaviors. From this base, domestication could emerge gradually, almost accidentally. By favoring certain variants, by planting seeds near camps, by tethering animals rather than killing them, people began to shape the species they depended on. Over generations, these species changed. Wheat developed larger seeds that stayed on the stalk for easier harvesting. Sheep became more docile. Dogs attached themselves to human communities. The process was probably not conscious, at least not at first. People were not trying to invent agriculture. They were simply doing what they had always done, managing their resources. But the cumulative effect was transformation. Once domestication passed a certain threshold, there was no going back. The wild ancestors of crops were outcompeted by their domesticated descendants or interbred with them. The knowledge of how to live without farming was lost as generations passed. Populations grew to levels that foraging could no longer support. Farming had created its own necessity. Whatever the causes, the consequences were revolutionary. The most immediate consequence was sedentism. Farmers had to stay near their fields. They could not migrate with the seasons or follow animal herds. For the first time in human history, large numbers of people lived in permanent settlements. Sedentism allowed accumulation. If you are not moving, you can own more than you can carry. You can build permanent structures. You can store surplus for future use. Material wealth becomes possible in ways it never was for mobile foragers. Accumulation enabled inequality. When surplus exists, some can acquire more than others. When material wealth is possible, differences in wealth emerge. The rough egalitarianism of hunter-gatherer bands gave way to stratified societies with rich and poor, powerful and powerless. Population grew explosively. Agriculture could support more people per unit of land than foraging. Even if each person was less healthy, there were more of them. Farming communities grew into villages, villages into towns, towns eventually into cities. Labor became specialized. When not everyone had to produce their own food, some could devote themselves to other pursuits. Crafts developed. Administration emerged. Religious specialists, warriors, rulers, all the roles that characterize complex societies became possible because agriculture freed some people from food production, and writing appeared. The earliest writing systems in Mesopotamia and Egypt and China arose to track agricultural surplus. How much grain was stored, who owed what to whom, the business of managing a complex economy. Writing was not invented for poetry or philosophy. It was invented for accounting. With writing, history proper begins. The events we call historical, the kings and wars and empires, the named individuals whose deeds were recorded. All of this emerges from the agricultural revolution. Everything that came before is prehistory, the time without records. But we should not let this terminological distinction obscure the reality. The people who lived before agriculture were not living before history. They had histories rich and complex, full of events and individuals and changes. We simply do not know those histories because they were not written. Down, they were told, and the telling eventually stopped and the stories were lost. The transition to agriculture was not uniform. It happened at different times in different places. Some regions adopted farming quickly, others resisted for thousands of years. The last hunter-gatherers survived into the modern era, remnants of a way of life that once dominated the planet. And the transition was not irreversible everywhere. Some agricultural societies collapsed, their fields abandoned, their populations scattering, the cities of the ancient world fell. Forest reclaimed farmland. The cycle could run both ways, but the overall trajectory was clear. Agriculture spread. Hunter-gatherers were displaced or absorbed. The human population, which had grown slowly for hundreds of thousands of years, began its exponential climb. The landscape was transformed. Forests cleared, wetlands drained, wild places tamed. We live in the world that agriculture created. Everything about modern life, from our cities to our governments to our ways of thinking, traces back to that revolution. We are farmers' children, even those of us who have never touched a plow. Was it worth it? The question may be meaningless. We cannot go back. The genie cannot be returned to the bottle, but we can ask what was gained and what was lost. Gained, civilization in all its complexity, art and science, philosophy and literature, medicine and technology, the accumulated achievements of 10,000 years of settled life, the ability to feed 8 billion people on a planet that once supported only millions. Lost, freedom, equality, health, connection to the natural world, the leisure and autonomy that characterized hunter-gatherer life, the intimate communities where everyone knew everyone, the knowledge of wild things. Whether the gains outweigh the losses is not a question with a clear answer. It depends on what you value. It depends on who you are. But understanding the transition helps us understand ourselves. We are not naturally suited to the lives we now lead. Our minds and bodies evolved for something very different. The stresses and discontents of modern life, the epidemics of anxiety and depression, the loneliness and alienation, these are not signs of personal failure. They are signs of mismatch between our evolved nature and our constructed environment. The ancestors would recognize our struggles. They lived through the transition themselves. They were the first to experience settled life, social hierarchy, the strange new world of walls and fields and possessions. Their stories, if we had them, would probably echo ours. We cannot go back to their world. But we can remember that our world is not the only one possible. We can acknowledge what was lost along with what was gained. We can try to build lives that honor our ancient heritage while embracing the gifts of civilization. The revolution is over. We live with its consequences, but the past lives on in us, shaping our needs and desires in ways we are only beginning to understand. Chapter 10. Why this history matters. Lessons from our deep past. We have traveled far, from the first emergence of our species in Africa 300,000 years ago, through the long millennia of hunter-gatherer life, into the painted caves where artists worked by torchlight, across frozen landscapes where our ancestors survived against all odds, along the migration routes that carried humans to every corner of the globe. into the invisible worlds of prehistoric belief, through the forgotten technologies that made survival possible, to the great transition that created the world we now inhabit. Why does any of this matter? We live in a time obsessed with the present. News cycles measured in hours. Attention spans measured in seconds. History, when it is considered at all, begins perhaps a few generations back. Anything older feels irrelevant, disconnected from the urgent concerns of now. But this is an illusion. The deep past is not distant at all. It lives within us. It shapes our bodies, our minds, our societies, our struggles. Understanding it is not antiquarian curiosity. It is self-knowledge. Consider the body you inhabit. It was built for a world that no longer exists. Your eyes evolved to spot predators and prey on the African savanna. Your digestive system evolved to process wild foods, not the processed products that now dominate our diets. Your stress response evolved for immediate physical threats, not the chronic psychological pressures of modern life. The obesity epidemic, the diabetes epidemic, the mental health crisis. These are not simply failures of individual willpower. They are mismatches between ancient biology and modern environment. We are running software designed for one world on hardware built for another. The bugs are predictable. Understanding this mismatch is the first step toward addressing it. When we recognize that our cravings for sugar and fat made perfect sense in an environment of scarcity, we can approach our eating habits with compassion rather than judgment. When we recognize that our anxiety and depression often reflect the absence of things our ancestors took for granted, close community, meaningful work, connection to nature, we can begin to address root causes rather than merely treating symptoms. Consider the societies we have built. They are evolutionary novelties. Large-scale, anonymous societies where you interact daily with people you will never see again are unprecedented in human history. For most of our existence, we lived in small groups where everyone knew everyone. Reputation mattered because you could not escape it. Cooperation was enforced by observation and gossip. The rules were unwritten but universally understood. Modern societies have invented institutions to replace these ancient mechanisms. Laws and courts instead of personal reputation, police instead of community enforcement, money instead of reciprocal obligation. These institutions work after a fashion, but they are poor substitutes for the informal systems they replaced. They are expensive to maintain. They often fail. They do not engage our evolved social instincts in the way personal relationships do. Understanding this helps explain why modern life often feels hollow, why we crave community even as we prize privacy, why we long for recognition even as we flee from scrutiny. We are built for a social world that civilization has largely destroyed. Our institutions can provide order, but they cannot provide belonging. Consider our relationship to the natural world. For hundreds of thousands of years, humans lived embedded in nature. The distinction between human and environment was not sharply drawn. People knew every plant and animal in their territory. They understood ecological relationships that modern science is only beginning to recover. They depended on nature not abstractly, but immediately for every meal and every breath. Modern people live in built environments. We spend 90% of our time indoors. We eat food whose origins we cannot identify. We are surrounded by manufactured objects rather than living things. Our children grow up unable to name common birds or trees. This disconnection has consequences. Research consistently shows that contact with nature improves mental and physical health. Children who play outdoors develop differently than those confined to screens. Green spaces in cities reduce crime and improve well-being. Something in us responds to the natural world in ways that artificial environments cannot satisfy. Perhaps this is because nature is our evolutionary home. The environments we evolved in were not sterile boxes of glass and steel. They were living systems, complex and beautiful and occasionally dangerous. Our minds developed in those settings. They remain attuned to them even when we have been removed. Understanding this suggests paths forward. Not a return to the wild, which is neither possible nor desirable, but a reintegration of natural elements into modern life. More parks and gardens, more time outdoors, more attention to the living world that sustains us. These are not luxuries, but necessities, responses to evolutionary imperatives that we ignore at our peril. Consider our ways of knowing. Modern societies privilege explicit, formal, written knowledge. What can be stated precisely, measured quantitatively, verified experimentally, this is what counts as real knowledge. Intuition and tradition are dismissed as unreliable, mere biases to be overcome. But our ancestors relied on different ways of knowing. Tacit knowledge stored in skills and habits, traditional knowledge accumulated across generations and encoded in stories and practices, intuitive knowledge that emerged from deep immersion in particular environments. These forms of knowledge were not inferior. They were adapted to different purposes. We may be losing something by neglecting them. The explicit knowledge that dominates modern life is powerful but limited. It struggles with complexity, with context, with the nuances that distinguish theoretical models from lived reality. Traditional and intuitive knowledge excel precisely where explicit knowledge fails. Perhaps a balanced approach honoring both ways of knowing would serve us better than either alone. Consider our understanding of progress. Modern cultures typically assume that history moves forward, that each generation improves upon the last, that the present is superior to the past, and the future will be superior still. This assumption is so deep that we rarely question it. But the long view complicates this narrative. Many things have indeed gotten better. Life expectancy has increased. Violence has decreased. Knowledge has accumulated. Technology has expanded what is possible. These are real gains. Yet other things have been lost. Equality, autonomy, connection, the health benefits of active outdoor life, the security of belonging to a community, the satisfaction of work whose purpose is clear, the richness of direct experience unmediated by screens and symbols. Progress is not a simple march forward. It is a complex trade-off, gains in some dimensions offset by losses in others. Recognizing this does not mean rejecting modernity. It means thinking more carefully about what we want, what we value, what we are willing to sacrifice, and what we are not. Consider our prospects for the future. Humanity faces challenges unprecedented in our long history. Climate change, mass extinction, nuclear weapons, artificial intelligence. Any of these could end our story. The stakes have never been higher. But the deep past offers reasons for hope. We have faced existential challenges before. Ice ages that covered continents, volcanic eruptions that blotted out the sun, extinctions that eliminated our prey and competitors alike. Each time we adapted, each time we survived. The same capacities that brought us through those trials remain available to us now. Creativity, cooperation, flexibility, the ability to learn from the past and plan for the future. These are ancient gifts honed across hundreds of thousands of years. They are our inheritance. We are not the first humans to face an uncertain future. We are merely the latest. And if we learn from those who came before, from their resilience and ingenuity and persistence, we may yet find our way through. This, finally, is why the deep past matters. It is not a collection of curious facts about dead strangers. It is the story of who we are. It explains our bodies and our minds. It illuminates our societies and their failings. It offers both warnings and encouragements for the challenges ahead. We are the children of survivors. For 300,000 years, generation after generation met the challenges of their time and passed life on to the next. Every one of your ancestors, stretching back into the mists of deep time, succeeded in reproducing before they died. The chain is unbroken. You carry within you the legacy of all that struggle, all that triumph, all that love. The ancestors are not gone. They live in you, in your DNA, in your instincts, in your capacity for wonder and your need for connection. They shaped the world you inherited. They shaped you. Honor them by remembering. Honor them by learning. Honor them by facing the future with the same courage they brought to their present. The story is not over. The next chapter is being written now by us, by our choices and actions. What kind of ancestors will we be? What will future generations inherit from us? These questions cannot be answered yet. They will be answered by how we live, by what we preserve and what we create, by the world we leave behind. The deep past stretches back into unimaginable distances. The future stretches forward into equal mystery. We stand at the meeting point, children of the past and parents of the future, bearers of an inheritance and creators of a legacy. Let us be worthy of both. The campfire burns low. The stars wheel overhead, the same stars our ancestors watched 1,000 generations ago. Somewhere in the darkness, an animal cries, a sound that would have been familiar in any age of human existence. Close your eyes. Listen. Feel the continuity that binds you to all who came before. Feel the responsibility that connects you to all who will come after. You are not alone. You never were. The ancestors walk with you, and the descendants are waiting to be born. Sleep now, dream of the world that was and the world that could be. Dream of fire and stars and the endless human journey. Tomorrow the story continues. It always has, it always will, as long as we remember.